Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 20 of the Lodgge Podcast. I'm your host, Scott Milley, and joining me today is my uniquely talented guest, Jordan Sparks. Jordan, how you doing today?
I'm doing great. Hi, everybody. Yeah, I'm doing all right, and yeah, I'm happy to be here.
So, Jordan is the president and CEO of his own video game studio, Shining Spark Entertainment. He's the director of technology and the workshop coordinator over at Hand-Eye Society, and a part-time professor at Humber College. Today, we're going to be talking about Jordan's latest game, Civic Story, Hand-Eye's SUPERfest, which just wrapped up on Sunday, and the Ontario video game industry, and a whole lot more as usual. So, without further ado, let's get into the conversation. Jordan, every time we start a podcast, there's always a question. I usually do it by season, but I think with this one, it just makes sense for the time of year. What is your best holiday video game memory?
Oh, that's a good one. It's I think my best holiday video game memory is not even something that is entirely exclusive to me. Back when I was growing up, there was um, it partly has to do with a lot of my relatives because back when I was a kid, I used to always go visit some of my relatives all the time, and there were two of my cousins who I'd visit pretty often, and we would always play like video games together, and they often had the consoles that I didn't, and so
Mhm.
I would play the stuff with them, and I would have a whole lot of fun. And this is not necessarily video game related, but something that's a bit tangential was that in the middle of us playing video games, my cousin who was older than me, he showed me he made like uh, a video out of like anime. That he was making. It was like one of those anime music videos. Like what in the middle
Sweet.
of us, like after we were finished playing video games, and showing me the stuff that he did, and I'm like, wow, that's really cool. And I've always been like super into animation, so I like asked how he did that. And he's like, oh, Windows Movie Maker, it's on every PC. And I was like, what? And I went home as soon as like after I finished visiting them, like the next morning, I went on my computer, saw Windows Movie Maker, made my first music video, and I've been sort of making videos ever since. And that was like when I was like 12. And
Wow. So you got bit by the bug that early on and then just like
yeah,
carried that on throughout your career. That's really cool.
and I feel like that was one of the things that propelled me into pursuing like more art stuff more seriously, even at that young age, and that propelled me to like sort of be here and even do video games because like being able to like do animation and experiment with video stuff and presentation stuff like that really helped when I started finally getting into video games years later. And so yeah, like I was always into art and drawing and stuff like that, but I think that was like sort of when the bug really hit. And I sort of got into that. I got shown that by going to my cousins and playing video games, and so that was that's like I think my most interesting video game memory as a kid.
I love that. I love like a lot of people have been able to ask this question to off air. 'Cause I think you're the first person, especially this year, that I've asked. But it tends to revolve around the cousins. It tends to revolve around the family. Like my
Yeah.
major ones, there's literally the same thing when it comes to like my older cousins, us playing like Crimson Skies when I was a kid on the original Xbox, which
Oh
I didn't
yeah.
have at the time. And like to me, that's like the shining moment of like laughing with family and like having a good time in the holidays and like just those co-op like couch co-op games when that was still big thing.
Mhm.
That was it for me for sure. So the first thing I want to get into is you've been in the interactive digital media space for over 12 years at this point. So now that you're making your own games, directing workshops, and doing all the tech at Hand Eye, and now you're also teaching young minds at Humber. It's been what, 3 years that you've been a
Almost
part-time video
almost
game
3 years,
professor?
almost. Yeah.
Man, what would you say in that decade plus journey? What would you say is a particular standout moment that has made you the professional you are today? So obviously it's a
Um,
bunch of little moments, but what's
it's
one that you can think of that's like, you know what, this has kind of made me, who I am now with all these different, pots on the burners.
I would say there's two different moments. Like there's a bunch of moments I could list, but I think in terms of all the stuff that set me on the path that I'm in now with
Yeah.
the interactive media, or let's say three, three moments. One, it was getting into the new media program at right at Toronto Metropolitan University, as they call it now.
Hmm.
Yeah, so I got into the new media program. like I didn't even know what to expect when I got but
Mhm.
it was like a lot of like art and technology stuff. And through the stuff I was doing with video editing at the time, I was getting into a whole bunch of technology stuff and doing animations and doing all sorts of other stuff. So that really prepared me to do a lot of interactive work. They teach us to make interactive art. They don't necessarily teach us how to make video games. And so that getting to that really helped, and really changed a lot of my own sort of perspective on art. The second moment was an accident. A lot of my career, I find, is defined by weird accidents that happen. So I wasn't actually into making video games for a very long time, and I had really no interest in making them. And then what happened was, I used to frequent a lot of student groups at
Mhm.
TNU, just because I love being part of community stuff. And I had been wanting to do some more stuff in community stuff, but I just didn't really find anywhere I could sort of work it into. And there was this one day where the university's game development club was meeting, and I'd been to their meetings like once or twice, but I hadn't really stayed. I didn't really have an interest in staying. It was just like something I just sort of wandered into. And they had their last meeting of the year, and I just sort of wandered in that day, not even knowing it was their last meeting, because I just was bored and had needed something to do. And they recognized me from before, and they were like, "Jordan, we need one more person to ratify this club so we don't dissolve." And I was like, "They're like, can you sign this form?" And I was like, "Sure." And I didn't actually. I was there. It was like a kind of like an ambush. Like I didn't really expect
You're
what
not
was
saying
going on.
no
Yeah,
in
like
that
they just
situation.
randomly asked me. I was just like, "Sure." And I don't really know if they thought I would sort of take it seriously, but I really
Mhm.
did. And so, um, when I did do that, like it was sort of, there wasn't really anything going on in the group. It was very small. There were not even 10 people. And I found a bit of an issue with that. So I was like, okay, if there's a game development club and nobody's really talking to each other, but also nothing's really being made, like what's the point of this club?
Mhm.
So I was like, okay, let's turn this around. So I did take a lot of leadership of the group, and then I started on my own, just sort of say, okay, we're doing workshops, we're doing this event, we're getting people from the game industry to come in and talk to students. We're going to advertise a whole bunch, and that is what really accidentally got me started
Mhm.
on both games and also in education, because I had no training in making like workshops and education and stuff, but I was like, I want something to do here, and it seems like there's not reaching its potential here. So I was like, okay, we're gonna make some workshops. I'm gonna teach people how to do 3D modeling. I'm gonna get somebody to go teach people how to program and invite people to come in. And we would get, over the years, we got hundreds of people who would come in from not just our university, but other universities, other colleges would come in and, socialize and make friends and work on games together. And it became a hub. By the time I left, we won awards for the events I organized, and we had over 500 people show up. As our like, and a lot of people being regular members. I still see people who started making games with us and are now doing stuff in the game industry, and it's kind of fun to see that. And so that's how I think a big thing that defined me, because people still know me from those days, and
Yeah.
they still like hit me up sometimes, and I'm just like, wow, it's that had a lot of impact on a lot of people.
I was gonna say people don't forget, especially at that time of their career, like that's something that means a lot to people.
Yeah,
So that's
like
really cool to hear.
yeah, it's funny because I had people who were like, I don't remember them, but they remember me from
Yeah.
those days. And like, they've actually, like, I gotten jobs because of that. I was like, oh, they enjoyed the time they had it at the Gamers Union club. And I was just like, wow, they still remember. And then also, I think the last defining moment, I believe, was
Yeah, please.
around that in that time when I was in that club and revamping it completely, and leading it. Um, I had the issue of, I'm around games all the time. I'm around programmers. I'm not really much of a programmer myself, but I'm an artist and a
Mhm.
designer, and I teach programming, but I'm not focused on it. But one thing is that I didn't really know what games I wanted to make. I was not really, like, everybody's making like platformers and a bunch of other sort of games that are kind of sort of like the stuff that everybody likes. and that wasn't really the stuff I really wanted to make. It was stuff I would help with in game jams, but I'm just like, do I really want to make this? Not really. I don't really have a passion for it, and I wasn't really sure if I would have a passion for making games. And then one day I was watching extra credits, and they recommended a game called Loneliness, and
Sure.
it was a small little free indie game by a fellow named Jordan Magnuson. And I played that game, and that game is not even like 5 minutes long, and I felt more emotions than I ever had playing anything. And
Wow.
it was like,
Statement.
yeah, it was very much like it completely changed how I thought about games and how I looked at games. And I was just like, you know what? I want to make a game like this, a game that sort of makes me actually feel something and also is about something substantial. And that sort of, I believe, set me on the game design journey that I've sort of been on to like sort of make these more impactful experiences. um, because I was just sort of chasing that feeling that I felt when I played that game. And now whenever I teach, I often like have students play that game, or at least watch somebody else play that game, and see how they, and we talk about how everybody felt about it.
That's
And there's a
cool.
lot of really interesting things. And I do credit that game with sort of setting my entire game design journey, because of this, like, wow, as soon as I played that game, it's like like something just clicked. I was like, yeah, this is the type of game I want to make.
And
And
it's like
I
in
sort
the
of,
curriculum now. That's awesome.
yeah,
Very cool.
so yeah, so
So that's actually the perfect segue into my next question. Is I want to talk a little bit about Shining Spark Entertainment,
yeah,
your studio, and your recent game, Civic Story.
yeah,
So finally out in the wild, I believe it was July of this year. Correct me if
hmm,
I'm wrong.
yeah.
So now after big run up to launch, getting things out the door, 5 months later down the road, how do you feel? How does it feel to have it out? How does it feel to have it done? The reception, your friends playing it, people talking about it. Now that there's been a bit of a gap and all those butterflies are gone, how do you feel now?
The butterflies are still there.
That's good. That's
It,
good. That's amazing to
it's
have. Yeah.
it's been a very interesting time. Like, I'm still honestly emotionally and mentally exhausted from making that game. That was tying back, I guess, to the last thing I just said.
Yeah, please.
When I played Loneliness and started thinking about the games I wanted to make, that was the first original idea I had, which is making a game about Canadian politics.
Right.
And because nobody understands it, and even at the time myself, I was like, I don't understand anything that's going on at all, and it was so hard to figure out information. And so I was like, what if there was like a better way for people to learn this? Because I understand why nobody wants to talk or understand this, because it is stupid complicated. And so I've been trying and growing the idea for like the past 10 years. And so I would, keep it in the back of my mind. I would make other games, of course, but it would always be, nagging at me.
Mhm.
And then it just took a long time for it to grow and change and evolve. And then eventually I was able to take the Hand Eye Society's Futures Forward, or Fun Futures at the time it was called,
Yeah,
program,
we
which
deal with that so much all the time. I always mess it up.
yeah,
Please continue.
yeah, yeah. So we I took that program, and this was before I started working for them, and that taught me about how you get grants and how you sort of do a business
Mhm.
for games.
It's an
And
amazing program.
it
All
is,
of our listeners, anyone looking to get into the industry, definitely check out Fun Futures or Futures Forward.
yeah, yeah. I know
Yeah,
Interactive Ontario also does their own variant. Hand-Eye is our own,
100%.
and I run the one at Hand-Eye now, which is really fun. And so we actually, I learned a lot about how to run my own game business from there, and I was able to start getting grants for Civic Story, and it started to evolve even sooner, or even more. Like, I started being able to hire a writer, and then other
Mhm.
staff, and then as I as I got grants and was able to hire my staff, the project grew and evolved and changed, and it became so much better than I anticipated it would be. And it became something really big. It also became something that was like super emotionally draining by the end of it, because it was just like there's so much of myself like invested in getting this done and everything, and then overcoming all the issues with my team. And my team was absolutely stellar. I love them. They deserve so much credit. and I always say it's our game, not really my game. And sometimes I slip up and say my game, but I really mean our.
Of course.
And it's like it was such an experience to make. Like so far, reception's been pretty good. We've had pretty good buzz. We had some reviews, and it's been great to see how people are feeling about the game. I'm trying to see if any educational organizations want to pick it up or talk about it, because it is something that I chiefly designed to be an educational experience of some sort, like a very entertaining, funny educational experience that teaches you how politics works, because who knows how that works, and actually gets us invested in our own democracy. Because I don't really feel people are sort of care, especially in Canadian politics, because everybody's so obsessed with the U.S.
That was exactly what I was about to say, and I was like, I think that's like a cardinal sin that we like a lot of us are guilty of, right? Is that
Yeah,
I even myself, I know more about American politics than I do about Canadian politics, and it's like
yeah,
that's
and I'm
not a point of pride. That's not a good thing, but a lot
yeah,
of the nation is like that. So something like
yeah,
this, I think, can be incredibly powerful.
yeah, and I wanted to sort of make something that would address that, because I feel like we are losing so much by not being not being aware of what's happening in our own backyard and not
100%.
understanding it.
Mhm.
And I the reason why I made this game was because I there was a moment in what I think 2011 when Stephen Harper's government was defeated and Parliament was dissolved, and like all these weird jargon that they would throw around that time, and I was like, what does this actually mean?
What's
I am
actually
very
happening here? Yeah.
confused, and it took me like hours to figure out. Oh, there's just another election coming in a few months. And that's like all they really needed to say. And I was like, okay, let's. What if there was a way that this was not so complicated, and at
Didn't we
least I
need this to be complicated and try to confuse the masses?
yeah,
Yeah.
and like, can I understand as a regular person what this actually means
Mhm.
to me? And so that's what the main idea behind Civic Story was, and it ended up becoming like the 8 chapter visual novel that it is today.
So, like, one thing I wanted to ask about, like, the creation of this game, if you came into it with the mindset of, okay, I would love for this to be, kind of an educational tool, and it could be used in a curriculum one day, or have people, be more educated on the political system in the country. What was it like trying to pull your own biases out of the narrative? Because we
Yeah.
all, of course, we all have our own opinions, we all have our own leanings, we all
Mhm.
have, our own biases, of course. But if you're trying to have something that's educational, obviously that needs to be removed a little bit. So what was that struggle like, especially between like you and the team, things like that? We don't need to get into the specifics. I'm just curious of that feeling.
The biases was something that I was actively aware of from the get go, and I knew from the very start of the thing that my biases, as no matter how much I mean well, um, will be something that has to be um, sort of dealt with. And I
Mhm.
don't really believe that you can make anything that is completely free of bias. I don't really
Oh,
believe
agreed.
that is potent. That is, I feel like everybody who says that like completely misunderstands what's going on
Yeah.
on anything. But I don't really think you can make something that is completely unbiased. And so I have to. I don't didn't try to make something that was completely unbiased, but I of course try to remove most of my own biases to try, because one thing that I often talk about is that when you make a game that has to especially that deals with something that is of sensitive subject matter,
Mhm.
you still have to have some sort of argument for what exactly you're trying to do. If you start removing that argument, then your piece sort of means nothing. But you still at the same time have to leave some room for the player to start thinking about what their interpretation of this is. So you're not telling them what you're telling them. You're not telling them like this is how you should feel. They have to sort of you have to give them room to sort of deal with that. And so basically, what we did was that we were very careful with how much of our own biases would leak into the project. We would constantly do a lot of research. One, I often emphasize to my students, like, research is the backbone of any great project. And so
Mhm.
everything that we did in the project, even though it's fictional, was based on research on actual things that would happen, actual facts. We did a whole bunch of research with a bunch of experts in various fields, like economists, doctors, indigenous scholar. We talked to so many different people to try and get their field expertise on, like, how politics affects their work. And it actually really helped us, because we started to learn so much just in the process of making this. Because I mean, I think one of the biggest things we ended up learning was like, none of us knew how the healthcare system in Canada worked, and we're just like talking. We talked to like doctors and nurses, and we're just like, oh, we had no idea this is how this was a thing. And so, and we even have like every chapter of Civic Story has a whole bunch of stuff going on, but it's like it's more or less focused on like one sort of area. And like we would sort of, we would talk to medical people and then sort of make a chapter about medical stuff, and we would talk and we would sprinkle a lot of like indigenous stuff across the entire game, or we would talk about immigration and also like international relations and war, and try and focus on a lot of the stuff, and sort of lets the player um, have the space and the brain space and the game space to like grapple with. Okay, what does that mean to them, and also does that challenge what their own understanding of it is? I'm not telling them
Mm.
that they have to feel this way, but they have to sort of relate with the game, with the events of the game, which is stuff that we intentionally made to be like relatable stuff that we see every day. um, and how does that sort of relate to the stuff that they're familiar with? So we tried as much as we can to try and uh, not have our own biases
Yeah.
too blatantly affected. We want it to be something that is very open to interpretation. We're not going to it. I'm not going to say that is completely scrub of bias, because I don't really think that to be truthful to say.
I think
For
it's impossible to have an
yeah,
impactful message without an opinion, right? So
yeah,
it's
exactly,
kind of
right.
like, yeah.
My opinion, the most bias I feel my opinion comes into is I want you to vote, and I don't care necessarily who it's for, as long as you vote. Because one of the biggest reasons I made this game was because I look at voter turnout rates every election, and it goes lower and lower and lower every single time. And I'm
Mm.
just like, this we can't really have a functioning government or a bunch of things that we take for granted if we start getting a bunch of people who have no clue what they're doing,
And that's,
and nobody
yeah,
voted them in, but they got in because nobody showed up. So
I think that's something that all sides can agree on, right? I think that's I think that's probably the least controversial bias to have there is get out and vote. And
yeah,
I feel like this must have really challenged the like even your like internal biases as a team, right? You
it
go
did.
in and you believe something and you think something, you grew up with it or you picked it up along the way, and then you guys doing the kind of research that you were doing. I imagine going into something and being like, oh, I had this preconceived notion. I didn't even realize I had these unconscious
Oh yeah.
biases,
Oh
right?
yeah.
And you go in and you're like, wow, okay, I never saw it from this angle, and you feel, you're educating yourself along the journey.
Oh yeah, like it educated us a lot, and it was a very much an educational journey for myself, for the team. Like we would always find like weird things that would happen, that we never really understood, or but we're just like trying to understand it for the sake of the game, and we're like, oh, that's how it worked. Okay, that completely challenged a lot of my understanding of everything, and we had to sort of work it into the story, and then also do our own like due diligence to try and make sure, because like if we're portraying something that's incorrect, even though it's fictional, like we're not doing a disservice to our audience.
Yeah.
So we try as much as we can to double check and make sure this is actually how it works, so that we can make a compelling story about it. The funniest thing was when we would make weird. There would be a bunch of like weird stuff that like me and my writer would come up with, and it would be like something that either happened or ended up happening during development. And we're just like, wow. Like especially like my writer, I can't think of anything on top of my head right now, but like my writer would write some stuff as a joke, because the game is meant to be like more or
Yeah.
less lighthearted and funny. And he would write a bunch of stuff as a joke, and then it would actually happen, and we're just like, "What?" I had to ask my writer, I'm like, "Can you tell the future?"
Yeah, like this isn't good. We should be able to call these things out.
I know.
Yeah, so for those who aren't aware, I realize as we get a little farther into the conversation, if people aren't familiar with Civic Story or haven't really heard about it or seen anything about it, give us the elevator pitch. What is the pitch for this game that you guys released?
So, Civic Story is a game about Canadian politics. You are a person that is thrust into a sudden election season, not as a politician or somebody of actual power, but as or actual like big political power, but a person which still has a lot of political power. And you are going to see how, in the course of this 8 chapter story, the events of the election, the promises by the politicians, and social opinions affect us all. And in many different ways, and through people of many different backgrounds, and through this, you are hopefully, and hopefully going to get a understanding of civic literacy and how things work in our country and the rest of the world, as well as an inspired interest in voting.
That's how you do an elevator pitch. Well done. That I feel like that has been years of practice.
Yeah. Also,
Um,
it's supposed to be very funny. So if you think that politics is depressing and you want to run away from it, you don't want to talk about it. This is actually a game that's built for you. It's supposed to be very accessible. It's a point and click visual novel, and yeah, it's not complicated at all. It's a very inviting and accessible story, no matter what your age is, how familiar you are with games. It's very much built for anybody who has ever looked at the news and felt confused.
and that soundtrack though.
Sorry.
Damn. The soundtrack.
Oh yeah, the soundtrack was great. I worked with Felix Arfin, and soundtrack was something that I was always very concerned about, like from the get go, because I think sound's a really important part for experiences.
Oh, absolutely.
But it's just like I know nothing about music. It took me a while to sort of get into the point where I'm just like, okay, ready for a musician, because I didn't really know how does music affect my experience. And so during the entire game, I would always find a bunch of tracks that I think would embody the type of feel I want for every part of the game. And then eventually, when I ended up hiring Felix, um, like we Felix was absolutely amazing. Like he was able to articulate a lot of the stuff that I was trying to tell him, and I
Mhm.
would try and as much as I could to look up a bunch of like music theory and sort of figure out if I could tell him what I want this game to feel like. But I would also share with him all those tracks I would do as my samples, and he went to town on it, and we had such a fun relationship making all these tracks, because he would come up with all these ideas, and then I would be like, yeah, this is great, but I really wanted to like sort of this kind of thing to hit a little bit more, and he came up with like a bunch of perfect ways to sort of make it work, and I love that soundtrack.
What
It's
an interesting like kind of collaboration when you think of getting into game dev in general. Of like obviously there's the audio team and a lot of these big studios, right? People are pretty siloed off. So I like that must have been a really fun experience for like you and some of the team to be able to have a lot of those one-on-ones with your audio and your soundtrack guy and be like, hey, can we work on this, or can this sound good, or like I would like to add this little flair like you were mentioning, and just be able to
oh,
have that back and forth and really see that the whole picture come to life.
so I'm actually really big on that when it comes to my entire studio. So when like one unique thing that I realize about my own career is that I don't really work in games. I work in all sorts of different multimedia stuff. So I
Yeah,
work
absolutely.
so I do graphics, I do some degree of coding, I do a bunch of like video stuff. I do photography. I do like filmmaking, and all these other, and a bunch of technology stuff and all these other things. And it really gives me a good overall picture of a lot of things and how things work together. And that really helps when I'm managing a bunch of projects, because I'm able to sort of see the whole picture. I'm able to manage a whole bunch of different people who are working different roles, and it helps me bring their work together in a way that feels cohesive, and also that the team feels like um, very well meshed. Like even though like you mentioned, like one-on-ones with the sound guy, like we didn't really sort of refine it to one-on-ones. We would actually have regular team meetings where we were all talk about each other's work and contribute ideas. And so like when I was, even though I worked the most with Felix for the sound stuff, he was actively part of like our meetings, and just like everybody else, he would show like his progress every week, and we would all give our own sort of feedback on it. And so I feel like this is why I say like a lot of it is our game, not just my game, because like there's so much that was contributed from ideas that came from us collaborating and seeing each other's work and giving ideas, that we had a really open space for everybody to just sort of feel welcome to share, like, okay, like, oh, this character looks like this, and then somebody would suggest like a weird sort of thing for this character. I'm like, oh yeah, that sounds cool, and everybody would love it. And sometimes not every suggestion made its way through, of course, but like I really wanted to emphasize in my studio like a sort of collaborative spirit that helped us really just sort of contribute and build on each other's work and success. And I feel like that was a big contributor to Civic Story getting done. I feel like it's also a big reason why Civic Story became so much better than I thought it would be. I'm really proud that I did not do it just by myself. I'm really proud that I worked on it with my team.
And it's not like some of the little benefits of being, like an intimate indie studio is you get to have those meetings, right? And you think of people that get into, bigger studios, people, yeah, like I mentioned, become a little more siloed off, and we don't get all the creative minds in one room and be able to kind of pivot and make those changes and give that feedback. So it's
Yeah,
always great to hear those stories from small studios that are able to, get in a room together and
yeah.
collaborate and really, really make something that they all feel like they have a sense of ownership over.
Yeah, I've worked in many different places where it feels very siloed, and it's like, yeah, my studio's not going to be like that. So I was very much there's a lot of intentional decisions I made with the founding of my studio um, to make it very collaborative and very open, and I feel like that really helped Civic Story become what it is.
It's amazing. Let's get into the second part of this conversation, right? So, like Civic Story, obviously, check it out. There'll be a link in the description. Check it out on Steam. You can get the soundtrack as well. But that's something that I would love for people to be able to go and see and check out that trailer and really get an idea of the vibe that Jordan's talking about. It is very, very cool, and it's something that I'm very proud to see come out of Ontario one, but to coming out of Canada and taking something that seems so um I don't want to say boring, but something like Canadian politics and making it educational and making it fun and accessible for people.
Oh yeah, you can say Canadian politics is boring. It kind of is, but
It
it
is,
is
I was
like
trying to think of a better word than it, but like, yeah, it's pretty boring,
it is kind of boring, but I
but
do
it's
want to make it.
important.
It is important that I do want people to sort of, if they even if they find it boring, at least understand it.
Exactly,
So yeah, and
exactly.
if,
Yeah.
yeah, like if anybody can sort of, if anybody plays Civic Story and just they watch the news and they even understand it just a little bit, I'm happy.
I'm a firm believer that you shouldn't trash something if you don't know anything about it. So it's like if you really want to talk politics and you want to have an opinion, you should try to educate ourselves at least a little bit.
Just a little bit.
Uh, so Hand-Eye Society. So for our listeners and the people who follow the lodge, looking to get into the industry in Ontario or are just fans of the industry in general, who aren't familiar with Hand-Eye Society, can you give us a little bit of a breakdown on what Hand-Eye Society actually does?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So the
Cool.
Hand-Eye Society has been around since 2009. We're one of the first and oldest video game arts organizations in the world, based in Toronto, Ontario, and we are an organization that serves the game curious public. We make opportunities for for people to get into games, to be supported in making games, exhibit games, have educational opportunities, and do workshops and festivals and all sorts of different other events and initiatives so that we can try and get people to learn about video games, feel welcome in the video game space, and be part of the games industry. No matter where you are from or what you do in life, we try to include everybody and make everybody feel welcome in the game community.
I really like the term game curious. That sounds like I really like that. That sounds it's pretty accurate for what we're looking for and like trying to get people into some of these programs. So you recently finished SUPERfest. So
Hmm.
I know I can tell that it is your baby, right? Being the director of technology, running a lot of behind the scenes, and being the workshop coordinator. So for those who aren't familiar, it was ran last week, 7 days, ton of games. A couple that I want to mention, we'll get into in just a moment. But can you tell our audience just a little bit about what Superfest is, what changed this year from last, and maybe what we can expect in the future?
Super Festival is the is a big event that we have been held for 2 years now. The Hand Eye Society has over 10 years of experience running different types of events, even though we've been around for longer than that.
Mm.
Different festivals that showcase and promote different voices in the gaming industry. And that last year was our first Super Festival, which combined a bunch of our older festivals that we would sort of do separately into
Yep.
one because it was just much easier to manage, and we made it into a free online festival for people to attend. And that was something we first did last year. We call it Super Festival, and there's a reason why the FEST is capitalized is because back in 2020, when I was hired as part of regular staff, um, we had we were dealing with the fact that COVID had just started, and all the art spaces that we usually would do events at had closed because of the
Mm-hmm.
lockdowns. And so myself and the rest of the team were wondering what to do with events. And because I was director of tech, it was sort of my job to sort of figure out, okay, what do we actually do now in terms of like running events. Now everybody's doing remote things, but nobody at the time really understood how to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but I did. Doing remote things has kind of been my jam for a very long time. So I remember we had one group, Broken Pencil, who was approaching us and because they're trying to figure out what to do because one of their festivals had just I guess been canceled because like
Mm-hmm.
it's COVID times now and nobody knows what's going on, and they needed some sort of alternative that were coming to us, and our team was trying to figure out like different types of ideas in terms of what can we do to adapt maybe this festival online, and I'm pitched to the team like, okay, what if we tried to make an online festival that worked in Twine? And I'm a huge advocate for Twine, which is if you're listening and not familiar, Twine is a free open source game engine for making sort of interactive text adventures like choose your own adventure books, but digital. And so I was thinking like some ideas of like, okay, what if we did it in Twine? And I sort of came up with an idea and a pitch for it, and a prototype, and then we sort of worked on that prototype together, and then um, we pitched sort of that to them, and we sort of ended up making this into our own technology that I would call the festival engagement software template, called which stands for FEST, and
Love
that,
it.
and then we and so as we worked on that, and we were able to make virtual cans in 2020 with the technology we had just sort of repurposed from Twine. It actually really was like, oh yeah, we could actually probably do more with this. And this had caught the attention of like a few arts groups, like the Toronto Comic Arts Festival,
Mm-hmm.
set to do it in 2020 for them. And we started to really take off and evolve the platform because it was very hard to work with at first, but we sort of like, okay, let's actually make this to a regular thing. And so we would actually run our events for ourselves as well as other organizations through the Fest sort of platform we had created. And so through Fest, we were able to make like events happen that usually wouldn't because of COVID and the lockdowns. And so it was really good because we were able to get people to rely on exhibition opportunities, get their art showcase, to get income, to get exposure, and that otherwise would have not been possible for the last 3 years. So
Yeah.
Super Festival was essentially a combination of all of our events using the Fest template, as well as combined with the Twitch show that we had started been doing. So we started doing that last year and showcasing a whole bunch of different games because usually our events are themed, and we're just like, let's just not only put in a lot of other things over a better or overarching theme, but also be able to celebrate the fact that Handai a lot since last year has been able to do a bunch of our big events for 10 years now. A lot of our events, such as Comic Six Games and Wordplay, were hitting their 10-year anniversary. We wanted to celebrate that together rather than apart. And so we ended up making Super Festival as a big way to celebrate the community, especially the perseverance of the community that still persisted during COVID,
Oh yeah.
the height of COVID, I should say. And so we wanted to make Super Festival a big online event, and showcase how online events can be done, because a lot of people even now still struggle with sort of making an online experience or an online event, and we've had a lot of success with our online events and fest and stuff like that. And so we wanted to continue the trend and see if we can inspire people from around the world through Super Festival. This year was a big challenge. We had a lot of more logistics to sort of deal with for various reasons I'm not going to get into. But it was a really big challenge, and it was also a really big challenge for me because I had to it summoned the energy that for the last several months that I was already like when I was already like mentally kind of like done because of Civic Story, and I was just like,
Yep.
okay, yeah, still needs to get done, so I can't take a break, and so I ended up just sort of going from Civic Story into just straight into Super Festival stuff after a little bit, and I was just like, it's a lot. It's
I
a
feel like
lot
you're
to
taking
answer.
a holiday, I hope.
We'll see. But it was quite the experience coming off right off Civic Story and then just jumping right into Super Festival, and it was great because now we actually have we have been working on the Fest platform and our workflow process on that for like 3 years now, and it's a lot easier to do now than it used to be because we completely revamped our production pipeline. So it actually wasn't too bad. It was just a lot to deal with and coordinate, and we're also dealing with people from around the world as well, from the people who submitted games to the people who are also like speaking and coordinating all of that. And so it was a lot of work. I'm happy to do it. It was fun, but still, it was a lot of work.
There's a couple games that I need to shout out, of course. So like seeing D Powerball there, right? Like Antonio was on actually the last episode of the podcast. That whole team is just a blast. Broken Spectre, right? Stitch Media, they're fantastic. You know, one of the leaders in the industry. Little Learning Machines, right? Coming out of traditional forms. Keyword coming from City of Not. And then a couple like personal favorites of mine, like Night in the Attic, Slay the Princess, Cosplay Club, ODR Hockey Heroes. Was there any, obviously you love them all, and
I
I
do.
loves them all. Was there any that really stuck out to you that was like a really shining moment, either just during the stream or, the feedback from the chat? Was there anything that really struck a chord that you think people, hey, this one in particular, make sure to go check this out?
I don't want to say because it feels like
That's, yeah, I was
I'd be
like,
pretty biased. I have my own preferences. I'm not going to say which ones I prefer because I feel like that's unfair to everybody else, and I'm not going to disparage the effort and the talent that we
I
had.
respect it.
I'm not gonna say, but I will say that it like definitely like the website's still up for now. We're going to archive it soon enough on which is going to be on itch, so you can go check it out. You can even go check out the archive of our last Super Festival on itch. So I would definitely recommend going to, I think, handisociety.itch.io to go check that out, as well as our mixtapes. And our mixtape, which is like a compilation of like a bunch of indie games that you can just download for free. And so it's definitely like I think there's something for everybody. Some things might not be for you. Some things might be. I feel like that's the strength of Super Festival. There's something for everybody, be it the games or the talks. And I would just recommend just going to check it out. All of the games, you can check them out. Some of them may not be out right now, but they are coming out, so you can wishlist them, or you can go and support the developers by buying them. There's also there's also 18 talks that have been archived on our Twitch channel, and so you can go and check out all these different talks from diverse perspectives and peoples from across the world, and you can learn something. You can rethink how you think of games. A lot of them have a lot to offer, and they're really interesting. Really interesting. We no matter what type of interest you have in games, whether it's like a design interest, a conceptual interest, or whatever, it's still something for you. And I would definitely recommend you go check them out. They're all archived on our Twitch channel at Hand Eye Society on Twitch.
I absolutely second that for sure. I think that's a big thing for a lot of people. Either people that are one looking to get into the industry, or two have been in the industry and looking to be more involved in the community. Right. I think Handai is a wonderful place to go and check out. And that's like such a welcoming and open community. And it'll also make you rethink of what you think of the video game industry in general. Right. There's a
Mhm.
lot of people that are, just on the outside of it, even just consumers thinking, big AAA titles, like this is what the industry is, all these layoffs, all these conversations that are going on the more the corporate side of the industry, but being
Mhm.
able to see a lot of the really cool things that the community of Hand-Eye creates together and experiences in these small intimate games like the one you mentioned. I believe you said it was Loneliness, right? Was what kind of got you into the industry in the first place.
Yeah.
These are some of the types of games that you'll see at these Hand-Eye events, of these small intimate titles that really they mean a lot. There's a lot of passion poured into them, and there's a lot there's a lot to be said in projects like that, and there's a lot of the artist kind of bleeding through the project, which I think can be really really cool.
Yeah, I'm really proud that Hand-Eye Society like does focus on these smaller, different experiences and showcasing the diversity of game industry for the people to the realms of thought and like the amount of different types of experiences. Because I was like talking with somebody the other day, I'm just like, everybody thinks they know video games and stuff like that. Like they know everything about video games. And I asked them, "Do you know what itch.io is?" And it's like they're like no, and then there's like, well, you're missing an entire side of that industry.
Mhm.
There's so much that can go on in the indie space that not everybody's aware of unless it's behind like a publisher.
Yeah,
And
100%.
recently through like the Game Awards, a lot of conversation about what is an indie, and I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah, that's we could have a whole podcast about that. Yeah, because I think you and me both have strong opinions, and they're probably the same opinion. But yeah, that's that's something that we could definitely get into during another episode. But yeah, so the last thing I want to touch on just quickly about Hand-Eye is what can we look forward to in the future? I know you guys really need you and your whole team, all the folks over at Hand-Eye really need to rest and you deserve it. Take that break. But is there anything that people can look forward to coming 2024?
So I cannot say for
Okay,
now
fair
because
enough. Yeah, this it's that
but,
time of
but
year, right? It's
but
that time
yeah,
of year.
it's that time of year. But also we have a lot of plans, a lot of changes going on internally as well. So there's definitely going to be some stuff happening in 2024, no doubt. We are, but I guess in the most immediate future, do have our workshops that are coming up. So we do online workshops. So if, from where no matter where you are in the world, you can go and check that out, and you can actually learn with us. We do all sorts of different workshops and we're growing them. I'm planning to grow a few new ones in 2024 as well. And then we also have a mixtape initiative, which I mentioned earlier. A mixtape is like a bunch of small indie games. We pay the people who who submit their games, and we accept them. So we say like accept maybe 5 or 6 of them, compile them into a package, and then you're able to get a brand new set of experiences every single time, and you can donate or you can get them for free. But we try to uplift a bunch of like really interesting voices in the indie community through the mixtape initiative, and so we've done a few of them now. We hope to do more in the future, and so definitely if you are interested in any of the stuff that we do or any of our call for admissions, definitely go on the Hand-Eye website. There, if you go to the join membership section, there's like a sign up list for a newsletter. We send the newsletter out every month, and so every time we have a thing going on, or the community has a thing going on, or we have a call for submissions for another super festival, or for another event, or for another mixtape, then we are happy to take your submissions, and you can also just learn about the stuff that we're going to be up to. So definitely would recommend signing up for our newsletter. We tell everybody what we're doing all the time, and we also try to tell the community about other stuff going on in the game space, whether we're involved in it or not.
There you go. There's your pitch right there. Hand-Eye. Make sure to go check them out. So the last thing I always like to get into in any episode of the podcast is something short, something quick. It's a two-part question for you.
Uh,
So since Hand-Eye, Interactive Ontario, who is behind the Lodge, and the Lodge being Ontario's home for video game and interactive entertainment, what is it about the Ontario video game industry that you believe makes us special? And what do you believe that there is something that we can improve on as a community?
ooh, okay. So I got a one
I'm
hot take
feeling a
about that.
spicy take. I'm feeling a
I
spicy
got
take. Coming. Go ahead.
okay.
Let's
I
hear it.
got a hot take on it. It's not going to be a quick answer though, so just keep in mind. So I think one thing that we that's really good and that really helps is that as an artistic medium, games have quite a bit of support. We get a lot of there's a lot of funding opportunities that a lot of people don't realize for games, both on the art side
Absolutely.
and the business side. And I feel like that has enabled a whole lot. It's enabled me, is definitely that allows people and creatives to try and get funding for their grand game ideas. It's not easy, but the opportunity is there, and in a way that's not for like other places in the world, like the United States. We actually get a lot of support, and the great other thing is that we have a lot of diverse people in Ontario, and from people from all sorts of different backgrounds, all different life experiences, all different professional backgrounds, and all sorts of different perspectives. And that really, I believe, helps create a lot of the specialness of the Ontario industry. We end up making a lot of experiences that are unique and special and have a lot of things going on in them because we are able to use diversity as our strength. And that has been really great in making so many different experiences. And I think that has made Ontario just so unique and really great. So I think that is one of our great, like that, and the fact that we actually have funding avenues to fund our games really
Mhm.
helps with getting a lot of cool experiences out there. It's something that here's my spicy take for the thing that I think sort of needs to be better. I believe is that and I realize a lot of people might disagree with me and also might hate me for saying this. The Ontario industry, not just in the game industry, but in the media industry, has a bit of an identity crisis because we want to like promote Ontario stuff, and we want Ontario stuff we want Ontario people to be paid. We want to promote the Ontario industry. I think that's wonderful. Um, the problem I find is that it is a little bit too subservient to the US in some degree because we at film or games or anything else, you can find so many things where the American industry will take precedence and they will really love if you get American dollars and American things. I'm not saying that's bad or anything,
Mhm.
but it does snuff out a lot of voices who want to do stuff locally or people who want to make stories about Canada. Because if you find, I will find that if you try to get something funded, and not all the time, of course, but you'll find you try to get something funded or you try to do certain things, the question will always come up like, could this appeal to the United States? Or could this appeal to somewhere else? But we don't have this love of ourselves as like a country or even like a province to really say like, will this be loved by people in Ontario? Will this be loved by people in BC? Will this be loved by people in Nova Scotia? Even though, like,
Got
regardless
it.
of the size of those audiences, can we make something that embraces the fact that this is Canada? And I feel like a lot of those types of voices end up getting kind of snuffed out. I will tell you that it took me years to get funding for Civic Story through many different places. And the problem I kept running into when I was trying to get funding, and I was told this either implicitly or blatantly from people, is that um, they would fund it if it was American, if it was about
Interesting.
American politics, but not about Canadian because nobody cares, or there's not enough of a market for it in Canada. But what if I don't want to do that? I want to make a game of Canadian politics. That was the one thing I was not going to compromise on. But it was just like a lot of people telling me like, make it about American politics. They'll love it. And I was like,
Mhm.
that's not what I want to make. I want to make a Canadian story. I barely even visited the U.S., so why would I be interested in making a game about American politics? So it's that becomes a bit of a problem because like I'm positive there's a bunch of really cool Canadian experiences that talk about our country and about Indigenous stuff and all sorts of different things that are unique to Canada, but don't get funded because they think the Canadian market is a dead end, and we don't really want to. We feel like we want to support Canadian content, but we don't want to celebrate ourselves. And we know that there's some sort of way that Canadian content can appeal to people, no matter where they are. I mean, look at even now we're having a resurgence of Scott Pilgrim, which is a blatantly a story that came out that is about Toronto.
Mhm.
We see all and we see and we know that Toronto has appeal because every American corporation who does film comes here to film their stuff. You can go and find Canadian locations in so many different films and TV shows
Mhm.
that say it's Chicago or New
New
York.
York
Or
or yeah.
I remember watching the TV show The Strain, and I was like, they had a scene where it was just like, the subtitle said the Smithsonian Museum, and I was like, BS. I work at the Royal Ontario Museum. I know exactly where that is in that museum.
I know where you are. Yeah.
Yeah, I know where that is, and I was just, and it's like, why are I? And I find this sort of issue where it's just and I don't think this is unique to Ontario. I think it's also just all of Canada. Why are we so afraid of embracing ourselves and making stories about ourselves? Because not a lot of that gets funded unless it has some sort of American appeal, or we just filmed it in Canada and say it's America. We have literally a movie called The Man from Toronto that apparently takes place in some parts of Canada, but it stars all Americans. That's kind of a weird dichotomy. And so it's I feel like on Ontario, we're just going to talk Ontario, but I feel like there is a little bit of a fear of making something that is just about Ontario. And I feel like we have so many diverse stories that we can tell as Ontarians who come from so many different places or so many different backgrounds and have a wide variety of experiences. And I feel like a lot of that ends up getting used for somewhat either American or Americanized um, ends. And I mean, I'm not saying that's inherently bad. I just think that there's a lot of stories in Ontario that could be told about Ontario, and we're missing a lot of that because part of the industry loves the American money too much. So I think that there is an appeal for Ontario work, and I feel like there's an appeal that works about Ontario. I just feel like that's a bit untapped, and I had to deal with that trying to make a game about Canadian politics because nobody wanted to
Mhm.
care about the Canadian part. But I feel like those types of stories and projects deserve to exist,
Yeah.
and I would love to see more games that just embrace the fact that they were from Canada. And I feel like if we do that, that's going to make our industry stand out, and it's going to also make the fact that we can be proud of where we live. I think that's really great.
And I think an important like underlining message there is that if that's people want to see that, right, and we want us to do that, we need to support the projects that are out there. So go and support the games like Civic Story and make it known that those are those games do sell, those games do have the support, and therefore more and more games like that will get the funding, because there'll be examples to point to when going to funders and saying, look, these ones have been successful, why not mine? We need those first few to kind of break that ground, just so we do have those examples to point to. I 100% agree with you. I think that it would be fantastic to be able to have a more projects that are financially sound and like right and realistic when it comes to funding, that can really focus on those Ontario and broader Canadian stories, that will be appealed by more than just our niche.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of the people, if people who are listening to this who are like in the Ontario funding industry, are going to hate me for saying that, but I feel like it's something that I feel just sort of needs to be said, and it's something that I just notice a lot. And I really wish that we got more voices in Ontario that are able to make a game about themselves. I would love to see more Ontario games that embraced being in Ontario.
No, we appreciate that. That's good to hear. I do appreciate the candidness, right, and being able to we can talk about some of these conversations that some people may not always enjoy, but we can all improve, right? And I think something like that is we need to kind of show it with your wallet, right? So like there's certain games like that that we would love to be able to point to again when we go to some of these funders and say, hey, we would love to get our game made. That it's like, look, these Canadian ones that are focused on Canada, these have been successful. So I think us as consumers, right, need to vote with our wallet and really support a lot of these games so that we have examples to point to. So I think that'll about do it for episode 20 of the Lodge Podcast. Jordan, do you have any final words before we sign off for the day?
Um, my only final words would be take care of each other. Have a wonderful holiday season. Um, I would love if you bought Civic Story and were able to play it and see what you think about it. I'm sure it has a lot. You're going to get a lot of opinions and a lot of feelings from that game. And I would hope that, and I hope you do. I really want you to have those complicated feelings and feel what that game means to you. It's going to be a bit different for every single person. I would love if you tried it. I would love if you supported the Hand Eye Society. We do all sorts of different things. If you getting into video games is something that you really want to get into or you want to learn more about, definitely hit us up. We are happy to try and help you out. And and more importantly, just related to what Civic Story is about, please vote. Please try and understand all the stuff that's going on, even if it makes you uncomfortable, even if you're like still like very confused or whatever, like please try and make an effort to at least understand what's going on in the world and the stuff around you and vote because we have so many rights that we have because people paid attention, and I don't want us to either lose them or lose opportunities or get into really bad societal situations because we all could not be bothered to check it out. So I really would appreciate if no matter what you take from me and doing all this stuff and Civic Story, like please vote, and no matter who you vote for, just please vote. And we'll see if we can make a better society together if we vote for a better world.
I think if there's any message to take away from this podcast, is just Get out there and vote.
Mhm.
So thank you everyone for joining us today. Thank you to Ontario Creates for your continued support of the Lodge.com. A special shout out to Continue, who is producing today's show. And finally, Jordan, a big thank you to you. Thank you for taking the time, sharing your thoughts, your wisdom, your experience with our viewers.
Yeah, and yeah,
And yeah, and to all of our viewers and listeners, make sure to check out Civic Story today on Steam. There'll be a link in the description down below.
yeah, and also thanks to Ontario Creates for also partially funding me as well as funding a super festival.
There you go.
They were one of our integral partners.
Big shout out to Ontario Creates. They help support a lot of the stuff that we all get to do. So,
Mhm.
sincere shout out. So again, we'll be back here next month with another episode of the Lodge Podcast, the last one of the holiday season. Until then, stay tuned to the Lodge for all of your video game and interactive entertainment news from Ontario. And everybody, take care.
Take care, everybody.